China should be very proud of its achievements to lift so many people out of poverty. In fact, some people in India told me recently that they are very jealous of China's achievements in that area. I think that it's a process that is not complete yet. And unfortunately, as part of the economic reforms, we're seeing more inequality emerging as some people have gotten very rich and some people are still left behind. So in the cities, we see some migrant workers who cannot send their children to school because they don't have the hukou. And in the far west, we still see a lot of poverty. This Shibu Dakaifa, that Open Up the West campaign, is a very exciting campaign because it is drawing some of the wealth of the eastern part of the country towards the west. But I think there too we have to be careful to make sure that the natural culture and lifestyle of the people who live in the West are respected. I think sometimes there's a kind of notion that the Han Chinese know what is the best thing for those minority nationalities. And so sometimes in the name of poverty alleviation, those people lose some basic rights to live in the way they want to live. So as for what stage China's poverty alleviation process is in, I know that until rather recently on the global stage, China said that it was still a developing country. And now China seems to have realized that it has also global responsibilities as a developed country. And so we see that China is taking a leadership role on some treaties like the Climate Change Treaty. And it's not saying, oh, we're so poor, 我们要走得慢一些什么的. They say, okay, we're also rich and we need to show other people the way. So this is a really good thing. At the same time, there are parts of China that are still really poor. And also we have to think about what we call in the environmental field, the displacement of environmental harm. As part of getting rich, sometimes people ask for clean air, clean water, safe food. And so some of the environmental problems that China has encountered are due to the fact that they did a lot of the manufacturing for other parts of the world. Some people say, how did you get so clean in America? Well, in fact, we put our pollution on China. So that's really not fair. Now China is getting strong and rich, but they're looking to put their pollution on some other countries as well. So that's not going to solve the global challenge of sustainable development. I think many poor countries are trying to learn from China. But I also think that China was able to lift itself out of poverty in a very short time because it was a particular moment on the global stage. And so some people have said that maybe that window is closed. And if Africa wants to use the China model or Vietnam wants to use the China model, to do this very intensive kind of manufacturing and export, maybe that opportunity is not there anymore for them. And we need to think more globally about the basic way for more people to become, let's not say rich, but more people to live a fully realized and comfortable and safe life in accordance with their own chosen destiny. Then we have to think about the model, because the model on a planetary scale right now is not working. I think one of the big challenges that the world is facing is that we're still basically, as a globe, working on a global capitalism system, which is built on the resources extraction. So what we're seeing now is a lot of mining, deforestation, overfishing, all kinds of using basically natural capital or natural resources to allow some people to become rich, while other people who are in those areas where the mines and the minerals are taken, they don't benefit from that. We call that an environmental justice problem, where the people who benefit from extracting the resources are not the same people who are suffering the costs of that extraction. I think US-China cooperation can bring lots of positive effects to the world, because these are the two biggest economies in the world. And so, particularly on environmental issues, if both countries are not working really hard to resolve those problems, then we're not going to succeed. Even if maybe Europe has some very interesting ideas, or some small country like Bhutan is working on a different kind of model, they can't change the world the way China and the US can. So we people who care about the environment in the US are very worried about what the US is doing right now. To be frank, we are very critical of the Trump administration, and we're waiting for another president to come as soon as possible. And we hope that when that other president comes, then that president, maybe it will be a woman, I hope, maybe she will be able to bring US-China relations back to their shared prosperity, shared dreams, shared ability to work together to resolve some of these deep problems, not only environmental problems, problems of, I don't know, intolerance and oppression of women, problems of lack of education for young children, problems of disease. You know, if we can become better global citizens, then there's much more of a chance for all of the world's people to enjoy a better life. About US-China relations, and I don't think we are competitors. We should always work together. I mean, of course, inevitably, can be competition in some areas, but most people think that there's such a thing as healthy competition, where when you're competing with each other, you try to be better, you try to create better products, you try to create safer products, or you work together, I don't know, to be a better patron of a smaller country. So I don't think that competition is necessarily bad, but I think that the US and China actually have a lot more in common with each other than they think. It's just that the US and China are both adjusting to a new situation, because historically China was really very undeveloped and the US was a superpower competing with the Soviet Union, and now China is basically the other superpower together with the US. And so we have to navigate that change in status very carefully. It really needs people in China who understand America, and it needs people in America who understand China, so that we can work together and we won't have misunderstandings. It's a dangerous time. It's easy sometimes for a misunderstanding to become a more serious conflict, and that would be a terrible thing. Well, the Belt and Road is really interesting because it's actually an extension of China's going out policy, which comes from the late 90s. So the Belt and Road, maybe officially the history is not very long, but in fact China has been going out for quite a few decades now, as China has become stronger. And so one concern I have about the Belt and Road is that even though it's trying to bring a better life and collaboration and prosperity to everyone, sometimes the ecological civilization that is talked about at home is not one of the exports as well. So although they talk about green development, in fact, they're building a lot of coal-fired power plants. And sometimes those infrastructure projects like deep water ports, roads, highways, railroads, they have a lot of environmental impacts that really need to be considered very carefully, especially if you care about climate, which is, of course, about carbon. But if you care about habitat loss, if you build a road through a rainforest, or if you build a dam on a river and it changes the whole ecosystem of the river, that has a lot of impacts on the local people and also on the wildlife. So I think that China can do even more to show the world a better way. And you know, sometimes they say, well, we just want to respect the laws of the recipient country. We don't want to impose our views on our friends. But I think sometimes if you're a really advanced country, like China should be, then if the local country says we want a coal-fired power plant, then China would say, well, no, how about if we built you some wind turbines or some solar energy projects instead? And they can kind of raise the level of what the recipient country is asking for. Well, what's funny about the Belt and Road is, of course, it started as that overland route to Europe and then going the maritime route around India. And now, basically, everything China is doing anywhere in the world is part of the Belt and Road. So like Latin America is in the Belt and Road, and the Arctic is in the polar Belt and Road, polar route. You know, so basically, the Belt and Road is not anything specific anymore. It's really China in the world, and anything China is doing in the world is part of the Belt and Road. I think that many countries are not prepared. They don't understand China very well. China just arrived on their door with a lot of capital to invest, and maybe the Chinese themselves are not very skilled at some cross-cultural communication. They're not really used to dealing with a diversity of people back home. And so I think there's some feeling of misunderstandings happening quite quickly because the change is so fast. And so on the one hand, China's arrival on the global scene offers great opportunities for countries that really need infrastructure development. They really need capital. But China is used to dealing from one government to another. They're not used to doing community consultation. And they think, oh, the government said it's good. The government said they want the dam, or the government said they want the mine, or whatever it is. And then they're surprised when the local people don't want it, right? So China needs to, I think, get more sophisticated about other systems, other cultures, and maybe sometimes they have to hire more local advisors to help them to navigate all of these new situations that they are encountering. And they're doing also really good things with these Confucius Institutes. They're trying to give people around the world a chance to learn about China too. And you can see that the Confucius Institutes are very popular in places like Africa, where, you know, the future seems to be Africa. They would the future seems to be China. They would rather deal with China than the US, you know? And so this is like a very interesting thing. I just think that the pace of change is extremely fast, and so there are a lot of pitfalls. So thank you. I wrote a book. I've written a couple of books about China, quite a few actually. But the book that I am most proud of is called China's Environmental Challenges. And that is a book that was published just a few years ago that tries to show the challenges that China is facing from inside. Everything from governance to national identity to civil society to these challenges of displacement of environmental harm, and then the environmental significance of China's going out policy. So that's a book that is written in a pretty accessible language, and I do hope that someday more Chinese people will have a chance to read it. For 2019, we still have Trump in power, so everything will depend on who the next president is after Trump. I just hope that Trump doesn't do anything stupid, because I don't trust him not to do something stupid. So I think this is actually a dangerous time in US-China relations, not only because of the trade war, but because of possibilities of tension in the South China Sea, other kinds of possible tensions. I think we just have to, everybody should be very calm until the next American election. And hopefully the next American president will not be Donald Trump. Well, I don't know who it will be. I mean, it depends if it's a Republican administration, a Democratic administration. It depends on if the person who is elected is sophisticated about navigating. My idea for a good US-China relations well, ideally, I would like to see somebody in power who has lived overseas, whether in China or somewhere else, but somebody who's skilled at understanding how different countries might see challenges from different perspectives, somebody who might be able to put themselves in the shoes of China's policymakers and Chinese people, somebody who would have a sense of, I guess, justice and a good understanding of the contribution that the US has made to creating environmental problems, to maybe, if you go back historically, to colonialism, imperialism, and maybe get a sense that it's not a terrible thing if the US is not the only superpower in the world, that we need a kind of multipolar sort of global management system that would include China.